Well, it wouldn't be a surprise to know that car sales or vehicle sales across categories have come off. This shouldn't surprise anybody. Everybody anticipated this. In some cases, the falls have been more vicious than what was penciled in. The question, though, is it possible to predict when would normalcy return in a scenario like this? Because this is unprecedented. Larry Fink of BlackRock said that is something that he's not seen in his 44 years. But somebody who looks at autos very closely and is associated with the largest automobile company in India, Maruti Suzuki, Mr. Shashank Srivastava Johnson, right now with his thoughts. One on the March monthly sales numbers, but two on the overall picture. Mr. Srivastava, thanks so much for joining in. You would have assumed that, you would have guessed that. I wouldn't want to talk only about the March numbers because we knew they were going to get hit. How do you view this current scenario and whether it's possible to make any kind of assessment about how long can this damage last?
Yeah, so let me quickly address the first part of the question, which is the March numbers and the year-end numbers. So March numbers, the industry went down actually by about 52.5%. And Maruti Suzuki was about 47% down, which means that we had a small gain in market share. For April to March, the industry has gone down by about 18%, and the Maruti market share is just about 51%, which is the same as last year. So this is as far as the last year is concerned. On the other part of your question, which is going forward, what does it look like? Well, as you mentioned, it's an unprecedented situation. We really don't know how the consumer is going to behave subsequent to the lockdown getting over. But we are working on all scenarios, and we are looking at our response so that after the lockdown is over, hopefully on the 15th, then we get back to normal as far as both sales as well as production is concerned. But yes, it's a negative, definitely. How much negative, we are still assessing, and I think in a few weeks' time it will be very clear how much negative it has been.
We were talking to Prestige Estates, the real estate firm, a little while back, and he was mentioning that while it's not an indicator, of course, but they got some surprising luxury apartment inquiries and sales going. I'm guessing dealerships were largely closed, Mr. Srivastava, in this lockdown period as well. But any sense about whether customers would be coming back with a bang? I know you mentioned that it's difficult to predict that. But when you guys do your boardroom meetings or by teleconference, of course, what is it that you think about what will happen?
We are still assessing different scenarios, and there are some positives and negatives as far as the demand pattern goes. Just for your information, after the lockdown was opened in China, there was a survey done among consumers, and consumers surprisingly said that the demand for their demand for personal cars will actually go up because they will sort of move away from public transport. So that was seen as a very positive for car sales. However, as you know, cars, the opposite viewpoint is that car sales in India, at least, is a discretionary purchase, which means that you have to have a positive sentiment to get into car buying. And that probably will depend on how quickly the sentiments bounce back after the lockdown is over. But we are preparing for all scenarios. But one thing is, of course, very clear. To me personally, I feel that the replacement car buying towards the high end of the car market should go up, as well as the additional car buying towards the lower end of the segment should go up. And I think combined with the fact that the first-time buyers, if they prefer personal transport, you can have a positive scenario, or the positive side of the scenario also. So let's see and wait for some time. We are working on all types of combinations for assessing what needs to be done after the lockdown.
So I can understand the lower end of the car market seeing that pick up, Mr. Srivastava. Just if you can explain, why would you expect the replacement car buying at the higher end to move up post the lockdown getting over?
Yeah, so the replacement car buying basically an exchange because like you were saying, for the real estate, the top end, there seems to be some more inquiries there. You would have probably, in my estimate, people who have old cars, BS4 vehicles, etc., they might be actually wanting to change over to new cars, and in any case, the replacement car buying has been going up during the last throughout the year, and I think that will accelerate further. As far as the additional car buying is concerned, my estimate was because people might choose a personal car as an additional buying from whatever, for example, somebody with college-going kids or somebody who's just joined a job or something might today prefer to rather not take the personal transport, rather not take the public transport, but go in for the vehicle. So the additional car buying also can be seen in the lower end of the segment.
You reckon, Mr. Srivastava, that if indeed demand were to come back post the lockdown, the financing equation will not be an issue? Will you reckon that will go ahead smooth? There's no reason to believe otherwise, but I'm just checking nevertheless.
Yes, so I think there are, so when I have given you some positives, there are also, of course, a lot of negatives, including, as I just mentioned, the car being discretionary purchase. The sentiment has to be positive. So it's not just about the availability of finance, etc., but also in terms of sentiments also, it has to be positive for car buying to see an uptake. That's the negative side, because after the lockdown period, the system does get shaken and people take a lot of time to get into that sentiment again. But coming to your point about financing, I think financing for retail should not be an issue. Of course, the inventory funding might be a different thing. So basically, in automobile, we have two financing. One is the financing on the retail side, which is about 80% of the total retail. And then there is a funding on the inventory side for the dealer, which is roughly about 90-95% of the car working capital. So on the retail side, I think with the rollover happening and the liquidity introduced already in the system, I think that may not be an issue. But on the inventory funding side, yes, we need to have a quick churn of the inventory for dealers to be able to take the financing for the future. And that, I think, is the big problem that dealers are facing today.
Okay. Mr. Srivastava, one final question really I know consumer sentiment is almost nearly impossible to predict as to when that would turn. So I wouldn't ask you to second guess that. But I see a lot of brokerages kind of penciling in what the demand scenario could be like, with the assumption that the lockdown gets called off on the 15th of April, and they predict a decline overall of about 1 or 2% for you, and you being the market leader might have the least decline in sales for FY21 over FY20. Would that be a fair assessment, or do you think even you are not in a position to be able to say that right now?
So I think the honest answer is that I'm not in a position to say that for the reasons I mentioned in detail in the early part of our conversation. And of course, analysts have some way by which they come to these very exact conclusions. But then, while the conclusions are nearly always exact, but also often they are wrong.
Got it, sir. Sir, one final question. I'm guessing it's, for no fault of the company, but I'm just trying to assess out here that there are opposing forces at play. Commodity costs would have come lower and that should be margin accretive. But I reckon that the cost of upkeeping the staff and giving salaries while sales are not on, and then probably renewing or doubling up marketing efforts in order to, in a poor sentiment scenario, might all impact margins. Should people anticipate for the first 6 months of this current financial, a lower margin trajectory from car companies in general?
Again, very difficult at this point of time. It all depends on how quickly the retail bounce back. I think it is very clear in our industry, if you have the volumes, then everything takes care. Every other parameter takes care of itself. as far as the wages and rentals are concerned, for the dealers, at least for our dealer partners, we have transferred a lot of cash amount to their dealer account very recently, last week, so as the broken chain of cash flow which has happened because the retail didn't happen because of the lockdown. At least that part we are trying to take care of. And yes, we will continue to make investments in the market for so that we are very much clear that we have a responsibility as market leaders to sort of lead the way as far as the bounce back after the lockdown is concerned.